Deepak Chopra is one of the most well-known and influential promoters of alternative medicine and New Age spirituality in the world. Named by Time magazine as one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century, Chopra, a medical doctor, first gained popularity after his appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show in 1993. The next year, he would publish his best-selling book, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, and to date he has written over 90 books surrounding the topics of self-help, spirituality, and health. Those, combined with his education and public speaking skills, have helped him garner an international following of millions of people and a net worth of tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. But while he is loved and respected by many, Chopra doesn't exactly have a pristine reputation. He's controversial for his promotion of pseudoscience, and skeptics tend to consider much of what he says to be complete nonsense. His teachings about something he has coined quantum healing, where he attempts to draw a connection between quantum physics and physical health, are often described as word salad. Some people question whether he even believes what he says, or if he's just looking to make money off the popularity of the alt-med and self-help industries. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start out with a tiny little backstory on him, really not that much. And then we're going to jump right into talking about his various business ventures, all the ways that he makes money, because there's a lot. Go into his lawsuits, because I found those to be pretty interesting. Then we'll talk about his teachings and his beliefs, mainly regarding like alt-med stuff, health in general, the quantum world, how he relates all those things to each other or attempts to. And then I'm not going to really talk about his self-help stuff at all because it's kind of just the same as what everybody else in the self-help industry says. I think it would be pretty boring. At least I'm personally not interested in it. But I hope by the end of the video you can kind of see what he's all about and see what kind of beliefs he has and see what other educated people tend to say about the claims he makes. So there's not much I want to say about his early life aside from the fact that he was born in India in 1946, making him 75 as of filming this video. He now lives in San Diego, California, or at least he sold a house in San Diego last year. Not a house, I'm sorry. A $5.65 million mansion. He might still live in San Diego. I think he probably just moved to like a one-bedroom apartment. You know, he's a humble guy, not very materialistic. Well, at least he speaks against other people being materialistic, but I'm not sure if it's supposed to apply to him too or not. I wasn't really all that familiar with Deepak Chopra before I started researching for this video. So something that I learned, and you might have a different opinion than me, but I kind of feel like he is less of an alternative medicine and self-help promoter and more of an entrepreneur and just businessman. I mean, that's how he's able to afford a multi-million-dollar home with an ocean view. To show you what I mean, let's go over all, or at least hopefully most of the ways that he's made money over the course of his life. Like, I'm sure I missed something because there's so many that it's just like I kept finding things like all throughout my research. I had like my entire script done and I found this other thing that he's a part of. So I think it's most. I'm also going to include some nonprofits that he's a part of because it's still relevant to who he is, even if he wouldn't make money from those. And then there's a couple things that I don't really know if he would make money, but I'm going to include them anyways. Number 1, doctor stuff. After graduating from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in 1970 at the age of 23, Chopra moved to the US and began practicing medicine. His main thing was endocrinology, which is the study of the endocrine system, which is like the thyroid, pancreas, kidney, brain, all those things. He's taught at many different medical schools, including Harvard. He was the chief of staff at a hospital in Boston, and then he started his own private practice. He was executive director of Sharp Healthcare's Institute for Human Potential in Mind-Body Medicine and head of one of their executive clinics for really rich people, I think, including Michael Jackson's family. Chopra and Jackson were even apparently friends for 20 years. I really don't think he currently does doctor stuff anymore. I can't imagine he would have the time or the interest in doing it when he has all these other business ventures which are going to make him a lot more money. But the thing is, there are a lot of bios of him on different places of his own websites or ones that he would write for like other websites about himself that all are pretty much the same, and a lot of them list or like write that he is a clinical professor of family medicine and public health at the University of California, San Diego, like in present tense. So I'm not sure if that's just really outdated or I don't know. Number 2, Ayurvedic organizations. So there's an important backstory here that we need to go through first. Beginning in the 1980s, Chopra was big in the transcendental meditation movement scene, which is a form of silent mantra meditation intended to help with stress, relaxation, and self-development. It was created in the 50s by an Indian sage called Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was a guru to the Beatles at one time even. Chopra and the yogi actually met and spent a lot of time together. Maharishi gradually went from a teacher to kind of like a BFF for Chopra. Deepak even took care of him when he was sick for many months, I believe. But Chopra left the movement in 1993 because of some drama between the two of them. Apparently, according to an article Chopra posted on Huffington Post contributor platform, which I believe anyone can just like write and upload stuff there, he said that Maharishi felt like Deepak was trying to compete for his position as guru. But Deepak said he like totally wasn't, and Maharishi was just jealous of him. It's a bit of a one-sided story though, because Chopra only decided to talk about this breakup story literally 8 days after Maharishi had died, which is always the best time to start blogging about what was literally high school drama that you had with another public figure. Through Maharishi, he gained an interest in Ayurvedic medicine, which is a form of alternative medicine that originates in India and proposes many ideas about the human body, diet, and health, and their connection to the mind and consciousness. While it is really popular in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, and it does promote many practices that have been scientifically demonstrated to be healthy, it is considered pseudoscience because it's not based in science. But we'll dive more into that later. Maharishi is seen as the guy who basically brought Ayurveda to the West. There's an entire like form of Ayurveda called Maharishi Ayurveda, which is basically like westernized Ayurveda, and Chopra is probably the most well-known promoter of it in the West today. Deepak has been involved in a few different Ayurvedic organizations. He was the founding president of the American Association of Ayurvedic Medicine, the medical director of Maharishi Ayurveda Health Center, and a founder of Maharishi Ayurveda Products International. Number 3, being an author. As I stated earlier, Chopra has written over 90 books, 21 of them being New York Times bestsellers. I'm not going to talk extensively about any of them, but I actually, a long time ago, bought one of his books called The Way of the Wizard and never read it. I figured I should at least skim it for this video, but I didn't. Some of his other books, just so you can get an idea of like what kind of topics he talks about, are Creating Influence, The A to Z Steps to a Richer Life, What Are You Hungry For? The Chopra Solution to Permanent Weight Loss, Well-Being, and Lightness of Soul, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, The Quantum Alternative to Growing Old, You Are the Universe, Discovering Your Cosmic Self and Why It Matters, The 7 Spiritual Laws for Parents, Guiding Your Children to Success and Fulfillment, Restful Sleep, The Complete Mind-Body Program to Overcoming Insomnia. One could say he's a jack of all trades, master of all trades too. I'm not so sure. But I haven't read all these books, so I don't know. I just find it interesting that one could perceive themselves to have such a complete amount of knowledge on all these different topics that they should write books on all of them. And I mean, it's not just these topics, he has more. Like, he has books on pregnancy and childbirth, the Buddha, Muhammad, Jesus, how to attain perfect health, lasting happiness, using your DNA to optimize health, enlightenment, soulmates, a cookbook and nutritional guide, chronic fatigue. Like, it's just so much different stuff for one person to be so well educated on all these different topics. But I assume writing books is one of his top sources of income. Number 4, public speaking and lecturing. Deepak is well known for his public speaking, and he has given speeches or lectures at many colleges and other places. Like some examples, he's spoken at USC, MIT, Hartwick College, Harvard, Google, the 2021 Vatican Health Conference alongside Anthony Fauci and the CEOs of Moderna and Pfizer. It's been reported that he's charged $25,000 for a lecture. I don't know if his general public speaking fees would be different. Speaking.com says his fees are over $75,000, but I don't know if that's accurate. I'm not familiar with the veracity of that website. He's done TED Talks, but I've read that you don't make money from doing those. He's done some virtual webinars over like Zoom, like this one where he spoke about abundance for the Self-Realization Center in March of this year. You could also put like being interviewed on TV in this category. He's been on Oprah many times. He's been on Trevor Noah, Ellen, Good Morning America, Jimmy Fallon, Conan, Dr. Phil. He's been on some podcasts, but I don't really know how many people or who like pays to have certain guests on podcasts since he is so well known. I mean, he's famous, you know. I assume that people would have to pay. I don't think he would do podcasts for free, but he's been on a lot of motivational speaker type podcasts like Jay Shetty, Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu, don't know how to pronounce it, Tony Robbins, Russell Brand, Marianne Williamson. He's also had 3 of his own podcasts: Mind Body Zone in 2021, Daily Breath in 2020, and Infinite Potential in 2019. He has a YouTube channel called The Chopra Well, over 500k subscribers, and he posts a combination of like shorter videos in portrait mode, some meditation videos, and longer conversational videos where he's on like a Zoom call with somebody and they're just discussing topics. He once hosted his own TV show on PBS called Mind, Body, and Soul: The Magic and the Mystery. I believe it was released in 1999. It's really honestly hard to find information on this, so I can assume it wasn't spectacularly successful. The Chopra Center. Deepak is the owner and supervisor of the Mind Body Medical Groups within the Chopra Center, which is a wellness company that he and another guy founded in 1996. Next, Chopra Global. So Deepak's main website is deepakchopra.com, and then Chopra Global's website is just chopra.com, and Deepak has many like streams of revenue, many incomes that are through Chopra Global. First, Chopra Retreats. There are 5 retreats for 2022, all which take place in the US and Canada, and Deepak attends and speaks at all of them. There are also twice monthly retreats held at the Chopra Retreat Center in Arizona, which Deepak generally does not attend. These all range from 3 to 6 nights and about $3,000 to $6,000. A bit pricey like all retreats, but I guess you get to meet Deepak and the places all look super pretty, so I'm sure it's worth it to some people. Chopra Masterclasses. These include Chopra Meditation Foundations, which is a self-paced online program for learning how to develop a daily meditation practice, and Chopra Health Foundations, based on Ayurveda, meant to help build personalized health habits and routines. Both are $298 and are led by Deepak and some other people. Chopra Certifications. They offer a 6-week Chopra Health Enrichment Program for between $1,350 and $2,195, and a 10-week Chopra Health Certification Program for between $2,295 and $2,495, both based on Ayurvedic principles. The second one is not like a general health certification program, it just allows you to market yourself as a Chopra certified instructor. They also have the same 2 types of programs except for meditation, same lengths of time, same prices and all that, and then the same 2 types of programs but for coaching. The Chopra Coaching Enrichment Program, that was 4 weeks and between $800 and $1,000, and the Chopra Coaching Certification Program is 12 weeks and $2,245 to $2,495. So pretty much all the same things. The enrichment program and a certification program for health, meditation, and coaching. The Chopra app. This is a free meditation and well-being app, but if you want to be able to access the entire Chopra library, it's $69.99 a year. I don't think there's any monthly options, so you gotta pay that $70 or nothing. Next, the Chopra Addiction and Wellness Center in British Columbia, Canada. This place was originally called the Paradise Valley Wellness Center until it partnered with the Chopra Center, and that's when its name changed. The treatment program at the center is based on principles developed by Deepak and another doctor. I assume Chopra Global makes money from it and Deepak makes money from that. Oprah and Deepak's complete 21-day meditation library. For a limited time, you can get access to all their meditations, which it says there's over 300 of them, for only $550. But after this limited time is up, which has probably been going on for like over a year, they're gone forever. You'll never be able to have access to them again. I think I'll just stick to the thousands of free meditation videos on YouTube, but thanks for the offer. And that's it for Chopra Global. The Chopra Foundation, this is a nonprofit 501c3 that raises money for research on alternative medicine and offers resources for disadvantaged people and communities. Chopra founded something called the Integrative Studies Historical Archive and Repository, which is part of the Chopra Foundation and collects knowledge on medicine and consciousness for research and education purposes. I don't think it really exists anymore. I think it's in the process of being incorporated into a different company called Whole Health Institute, owned by Alice Walton, who is the daughter of the founders of Walmart, who is also creating something called the Chopra Medical Library in honor of Deepak. I'm a bit unsure of all of that though. Next is the Chopra Integrative Medicine Center of Excellence. This is like a treatment center in Florida that it seems like they just offer health consultations to figure out what's wrong with people, and they specialize in aging, oncology, cardiology, and psychology, but they try to address those things in an integrative way. He's a senior scientist at the Gallup organization, which puts out public opinion polls, and they also conduct research on stuff. I assume he gets paid for that. Virgin Comics. He founded a comic book publishing company called Virgin Comics with his son and Sir Richard Branson, who's the founder of the Virgin Group. Apparently, he's even written some of the comics himself. Just Capital. He's the co-founder of this nonprofit, which ranks companies by their business practices. State.com. Chopra is or was on the board of advisors for a tech startup called State.com. And lastly, he is a board member for Men's Warehouse, which I just love that because it seems so random compared to all the other ones. Like a couple of them are kind of businessy related, but most of them are like health and medical things. And then he's just like on the board of a men's dress clothing company. I mean, why? So that's all that I could find on his business ventures. As you can see, there is a lot of them. Like he's an entrepreneur, he's a businessman, and I'm sure he's a busy guy. But he's not too busy for lawsuits, and quite a few of them. In 1991, the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA for short, published an article called Letter from New Delhi that Chopra co-wrote about transcendental meditation and Ayurveda, but the authors failed to disclose a conflict of interest, which was for Chopra that he had been the president, treasurer, and clerk of Maharishi Ayurveda Products International. One of the other authors was connected to the company too. The article actually presented to Maharishi Ayurveda Products as having anti-cancer benefits. So kind of sketchy. But Chopra and the other author responded by saying that neither of them were currently profiting from the company. They just had in the past before the article was written. This situation brought up a lot of controversy for JAMA's editorial processes, and the journal got a lot of flack for letting this article be published, not only because of the financial interest situation, because that's not really something that's their fault, but also because of the shoddy science that was presented in the article, which they allowed to be published. The associate editor, Andrew Skolnick, addressed the controversy in an article response where he criticized Chopra and the two other articles for their lack of financial interest disclosure. And then Deepak and two transcendental meditation groups, I assume one of them would be Maharishi's, sued JAMA and Andrew Skolnick for defamation, seeking $194 million in damages. But the case ended up getting dismissed. I don't know why. A lot of these lawsuits, like different articles present different information. There's a lot of things that are conflicting. So it's very possible that I could get some details. Like I'm almost certain some of these details and some of these are going to be wrong. But since it was dismissed, I'm sure Deepak lost quite a bit of money in that. This situation might have been another reason that he left the Transcendental Meditation movement. I've heard multiple other reasons though, so I guess it's not really that important. He sued a former employee named Joyce Weaver in the 90s who he claimed had been blackmailing him by asking for $50,000 for her silence about him allegedly having relations with a prostitute, and this woman had previously filed a lawsuit against him claiming that he sexually harassed her. I believe this woman would have been some sort of employee of the Chopra Center. You'll see why later. The blackmail case was tossed out, and he claims that it was because of corruption in the San Diego judicial system and that many of the judges were conspiring against him. He spent over $1 million on legal fees for that case alone and didn't get any of that money back. The prostitute later recanted her story, according to Newsweek.com. No clue if that's a reliable source, but honestly, I think the story is a little fishy anyways. Even if she didn't recant the story, like, it all started out because the prostitute had called the Chopra Center and left a message saying that she had had relations with him, and then the woman Joyce Weaver recorded the message. And like, I'm not familiar with prostitution norms, but I just think it doesn't make any sense why one would call the workplace of one of their customers just to say that he had been a customer. It doesn't make any sense to me. So, I mean, I don't really know. I also don't know if Deepak sexually harassed this woman. I have no clue. I've not found any details on that. He sued the Weekly Standard for $35 million for libel when they published an article about the prostitute story as if it was, I guess, like, not alleged, it was 100% true. But they settled, and the magazine apologized, said the story was not true, and they also paid us legal fees for that case. The dates of when all this happened are also confusing, so I'm just gonna say it happened sometime in the 90s. In 1995, Deepak, an Ayurvedic physician and friend of Chopra's who co-authored the JAMA article Brihaspati Devtraguna, the Sharp Institute, which Chopra was executive director of, and others were sued for wrongful death by a woman named Joni Flint, who claimed that her husband David, who had leukemia, died because of their information and treatment. The story goes that Triguna, presented himself as a licensed health professional despite not being one, and recommended that David change his diet, do a purification treatment, and take some herbal supplements. From Maharishi's Ayurvedic website, of course, such as Maharishi Amrit Kalash, which promotes life force energy and ensures perfect health, or ensures that you experience 6 times better health and a better life. One of the two, I guess. Chopra performed something called a pulse diagnosis on the man, which is an Ayurvedic form of diagnosing someone where you determine if somebody has like diabetes, cancer, asthma, etc., just from taking their pulse. He also gave the man a mantra for quantum sound healing, which Deepak has said is like meditation but prescribed for specific illnesses. Months later, Triguna checked David's pulse again, and he determined that the leukemia was gone. But it wasn't, and he died after spending $10,000 on all these Ayurvedic products and services, and the lawsuit therefore accused Chopra and the others of fraud. But the man's wife, Joni, couldn't afford to pursue the lawsuit, so it really never went very far. In 1997, Stanford professor Robert Sapolsky sued Deepak for plagiarism or copyright infringement. Chopra had failed to credit Sapolsky when he used 5 passages of text and 1 table that the professor wrote about the endocrinology of stress, which Deepak put in his 1993 book, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, The Quantum Alternative to Growing Old. I believe that Sapolsky first sent a cease and desist, but Chopra and the book publisher didn't respond to it, and that's when he decided to go through with the lawsuit. Eventually they reached a settlement though, and all further printings of the book credited Sapolsky. Last one, around 2013, Chopra sued a former business partner named James Walsh, who he donated $155,000 to help start up something called the Consciousness Project. But he claims that Walsh was taking this money for his own personal use, and so in the lawsuit he asked for all that money back. But they settled the lawsuit too, so I'm not sure if he got it back, but I hope he did, because I honestly side with him on this one just based on what I saw written about James Walsh. He seemed like kind of a sketchy character. Not that Chopra's never been one either, but alright, so now let's get into his teachings and beliefs regarding health, consciousness, the mind, healing, all that stuff, their connection to each other. I'm honestly not going to go into a lot of different individual claims about different types of health problems and all that, which might seem a little weird. You can certainly let me know your opinion down below, because I was a little unsure of how to make this part. I felt very uncertain of it. I have a lot to say about this, but I'm going to talk and focus more on his foundations of these beliefs, which are Ayurveda and quantum physics, because the foundations are either lacking evidence and or like totally misinterpreted. So if the foundations are that way, then the claims are also that way as well. And so I'm gonna talk more about the foundations and just a couple claims. I think the best place to start out is by explaining some of the basics of Ayurveda, because that's where a lot of his beliefs stem from. I want to remind you that Deepak promotes Maharishi Ayurveda, which is not the same as traditional Ayurveda, but I don't really know what's the same and what's different. Maharishi International University states that their type is a unique form of Ayurveda that's been reevaluated from a scientific perspective for modern day use. So that's all I got for you. Ayurveda originated thousands of years ago in India, and it focuses on prevention of health problems and balance in the body and mind. There are 3 mind-body types, which are called the doshas: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Each of us have a predominant dosha or doshas. They're kind of like star signs in a sense, but basically you want to try to keep them balanced. Good things happen when they're balanced, bad things happen when they're not. Chopra Global actually has a dosha quiz on it that you can take if you want to find out what your dosha or doshas are. The quiz website says, understanding your dosha reveals how to keep yourself in balance and stay happy, healthy, and disease-free. I took the quiz and I got Vata Kapha, 50% Vata, 40% Kapha, and 10% Pitta. I mentioned pulse diagnosis earlier, so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that right now. Basically, it's believed that Ayurvedic practitioners can determine the balance of the 3 doshas through checking someone's pulse. And disease is related to dosha imbalances. So someone that has a lot of Vata and very little Pitta and Kapha would have an imbalance that needs to be fixed. So an Ayurvedic practitioner might prescribe this person with a certain diet, tell them to take X, Y, and Z herbs, enemas, laxatives, have them meditate, do certain kind of exercises, massages. Those are all things that are common in Ayurveda, and those things that would be prescribed to them essentially would be to help get the doshas back into balance so that it doesn't turn into a worse situation. That is what leads to disease, because like I said, Ayurveda is, they say it's about preventative medicine, preventing things from happening in the first place. So you don't want your doshas to be too out of balance, and all of that can be apparently discovered through checking someone's pulse. Do I believe it? No, personally not. Like I said, a lot of the controversial stuff that Deepak says stems from his Ayurvedic beliefs, but also his interpretation of quantum physics and how he tries to combine the two. So quantum physics is physics for atoms and subatomic particles. I believe that quantum physics is like a subset, like a type of quantum mechanics or quantum science, but honestly, I'm just going to use all the terms interchangeably so it's less repetitive. Deepak has coined his own term called quantum healing, and I'm going to give you 2 different explanations so you can really understand what he means by it. So he says it is the ability of one mode of consciousness, the mind, to spontaneously correct the mistakes in another mode of consciousness, the body. Quantum healing moves away from external, high-technology methods towards the deepest core of the mind-body system. The core is where healing begins. To go there and learn to promote the healing response, you must get past all the grosser levels of the body, cells, tissues, organs, and systems, and arrive at the junction point between mind and matter, the point where consciousness actually starts to have an effect. Another explanation he gives is quantum healing is healing the body-mind from a quantum level. That means from a level which is not manifest at a sensory level. Our bodies ultimately are fields of information, intelligence, and energy. Quantum healing involves a shift in the fields of energy information, so as to bring about a correction in an idea that has gone wrong. So quantum healing involves healing one mode of consciousness, mind, to bring about changes in another mode of consciousness, body. Chopra believes that modern physics substantiate ancient Ayurvedic metaphysical principles. Metaphysics, if you don't know, is a branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality. It includes questions about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between mind and matter. Physicist Heinz R. Pagels says, "No qualified physicist that I know would claim to find such a connection between modern physics and Ayurvedic principles without knowingly committing fraud." People use quantum mechanics to explain their beliefs about the connection between the body and consciousness, often referred to the wave-particle duality that's observed in something called the double-slit experiment, and Chopra is no different. I'm going to explain this experiment to the best of my ability, and there will be a video on screen to help you visualize it. I think, personally for me, it's a lot more helpful to see it happening. My description of this is partially coming from articles that I read when I talked about this in my Law of Attraction video 2 years ago or whatever, and also partially coming from an article written by Thomas Leah, who has a Bachelor's of Science in Physics. So when electrons are fired through two slits onto a wall, they create what's called an interference pattern, similar to waves rather than particles. Scientists were confused by this and thought that maybe the electrons could be interfering with each other, basically hitting each other, bouncing off each other, causing the wave-like pattern to appear on the wall. But when they fired the electrons one at a time, it created the same interference pattern, which led them to determine that each individual electron is interfering with itself and can be considered to go through both slits. Physicists currently don't have a definite explanation for this, though there are multiple different hypotheses and interpretations of how that makes sense, how that's possible. But because they wanted to figure out what was actually happening, they decided to use a machine, which is often referred to as the observer, to detect which slit each electron actually goes through. When the electrons were being observed, the wave function collapsed, which means that the electrons no longer produced a pattern like a wave, but they produced a pattern like a particle. So they acted differently when they were being observed. Folks like Chopra end that story right there. They take that information and they claim that consciousness or observing or thinking about something has an effect on it, essentially. For example, in another of his articles posted on the Huffington Post contributor platform titled "The Illusion of Past, Present, and Future," Chopra says, "Quantum physics tells us that objects exist in a suspended physical state until observed, when they collapse to just one outcome. We don't know what happens until we investigate, and our investigation influences that reality." The issue here is that the machine that is observing the electrons, in order for it to observe a subatomic particle like an electron, what it does is it emits photons at the electrons, which scatters them and causes the wave function collapse. There is not a human observer just looking at the electrons and then they change state because, they just feel so embarrassed that somebody's watching them. But people who use this to explain their metaphysical beliefs, like Chopra, they focus so much on that word observer and to describe this machine and kind of personify it. And it tricks people into thinking that this has something to do with human observation. It doesn't at all. There's no human whose consciousness affected the experiment. In fact, a better word to use would probably be that this machine measures the electrons rather than observing it. No one's looking at them. No one's seeing them because they're electrons and humans cannot see electrons with our eyes. And that's another aspect of why quantum experiments like the double slit one don't demonstrate anything about human consciousness's relationship to the body. Quantum science is about microscopic particles. Macroscopic objects like the human body or our organs, they don't behave the same way as photons and electrons. They don't exhibit interference or wave function collapse. They can't. You can't shoot people one by one through two different slits and have them show up as a wave-like pattern on a wall behind it. That's not gonna work. Does quantum science support Deepak's views on quantum healing? Well, this experiment certainly doesn't, but let's see what else he has to say about the subject. Another quote from his Huffington Post article is, Scientists in France shot particles of light photons into a measuring apparatus and showed that what they did, now in the present, could retroactively change something that had already happened in the past. As the photons passed a fork in the apparatus, they had to decide whether to behave like particles or waves when they hit a beam splitter. Later on, after the photons passed the fork, the experimenter could randomly switch a second beam splitter on and off electronically. It turns out that what the observer decided at that point determined what the particle actually did at the fork in the past. Stephen Novella, a contributor to skepticblog.com, wrote an article called Deepak Chopra Mangles Quantum Mechanics, and he's not a physicist, he's a neurologist, so maybe his explanation isn't accurate, but he addresses this claim from Chopra with, yes, these experiments are fascinating, but they do not describe the future affecting the past as Chopra misinterprets. They describe what's known as quantum entanglement. When particles are paired or linked in some way, for example when they're created by the same process, similar properties are linked, even while still being in a wave of probability. For example, if one particle is spin up, the other will be spin down. I don't know if that's like the actual terminology or if he meant to say spun up, like, I don't know. I'm just reading you what it says. Anyways, if one particle is spin up, the other will be spin down, even if their spin is not determined until much later, and even if the particles are separated by millions of light years at the time of the collapse of the wave function. Physicists do not pretend to understand the fundamental nature of quantum entanglement. That is a Nobel Prize waiting to be won. But it does not represent the future affecting the past, nor does it represent faster than light or instantaneous communication. Experiments have been done showing that it is impossible to transmit information faster than light using quantum entanglement. Information is not going faster than light or into the past. Chopra is using a common trick of the pseudoscientist, exploiting cutting-edge science which the public is not likely to understand, and pretend as if there is proof where there is uncertainty. Take some interesting experiments, then leap way ahead to conclusions that serve their metaphysical purposes, but which are not settled science. Novella also says that, I suspect Chopra doesn't care about getting the science right. He seems to be working backwards from his metaphysics and then happily misinterpreting quantum mechanics to suit his needs. Now let's dive into some more specific health claims that Chopra has made. So according to Deepak, remaining healthy is actually a conscious choice. You decide in your mind whether to be healthy or not. He claims that he has never been sick in his whole life, never used medicine, and says that it is possible to attain perfect health. He says in his book, Perfect Health, that there exists in every person a place that is free from disease, that never feels pain, that cannot age or die. He's also stated, I don't think health is physical at all. So basically what he's saying is that health problems are caused and cured by shifts in consciousness. I assume based on other things I've heard him say that he's not referring to like breaking a bone or those kind of injuries, but more so like diseases. So if you have an autoimmune disease, if you have heart problems, if you have cancer, stuff like that, I believe he thinks can be cured through the mind. Completely, 100% through the mind. Since your mind can cure all these ailments, it is therefore possible to have perfect health as long as you are on a certain level of consciousness, essentially. That's what I would take from what he says. He also thinks that by consciously using our awareness, we can influence the way we age biologically. You can tell your body not to age. As mentioned earlier, he's written a book called Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, the Quantum Alternative to Growing Old. And he's 75 right now, and I think he looks good for his age, but I mean, if you look at pictures of him from like decades ago, it's clear that he's aging. I mean, he has more wrinkles, he's getting gray hairs, normal things that happens to everyone as they age. Because, well, obviously you can do things that make you look younger, make you feel younger. You can't tell your body not to age. It's gonna happen. In one of his interviews with Oprah, He claims that, I suppose some of the evidence for why he believes that humans have the potential to not age is because there are certain microorganisms or protozoa, like for example, there's an animal called the hydra that they don't age or they don't show signs of aging. And since those animals are part of nature, that means that nature has in it the mechanism to make something not age. Since humans are aware of that, we can tap into it, which technically would mean that humans should be capable of having any feature of any animal, right? Like starfish are able to regenerate their limbs. So humans should be able to do that too. Although I've never seen it happen, but maybe it's because we just haven't tapped into it. But it doesn't make any sense, and I really would love to see his explanation for that. Chopra could be classified by some people as an AIDS denier based on some statements he made in an interview with Mr. Tony Robbins, motivational speaker, great guy, where they discuss this topic, and Deepak at one point refers to it as so-called AIDS, and he also makes it seem like people have been conditioned or indoctrinated to believe that AIDS exists in the way that we currently understand it to, when it actually only begins existing when someone becomes convinced that they have it. I mean, I'm not really sure if that's what he means. He is honestly, it feels like he's never very explicit with what he's saying. He always keeps it super vague, and so you can interpret it in multiple different ways. But I feel like there's usually one like predominant way that people would interpret it in. But then he can always go back later and accuse everyone of taking what he said out of context on purpose, which you'll see he does here, in my opinion. To get into more of the problematic stuff that he says in this article, he claims that it's almost impossible for AIDS spokesperson Magic Johnson to actually have AIDS because of the fact that he's heterosexual, and he kind of implies that he thinks he got a false positive diagnosis. Although the CDC says that 10% of HIV transmissions are through heterosexual contact, 10% is not almost impossible. If you're not familiar with it, HIV is the virus that can lead to the development of AIDS if left untreated. That's a well-known fact in the medical community. It's not controversial, but Chopra essentially says that HIV is not really the cause of AIDS, or not like the main cause of AIDS. His exact words were, HIV may be the precipitating agent in a susceptible host. The material agent is never the cause of the disease. It may be the final factor in inducing the full-blown syndrome in somebody who's already susceptible. And then Tony Robbins asks what made them susceptible. So Chopra responds, their own interpretations of the whole reality they're participating in. Tony asks, could that be translated into their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs, their lifestyle? And Chopra says, absolutely. So Chopra thinks that somebody's mindset or the state of consciousness can determine whether or not somebody gets AIDS. Like, that's what I got from that. A belief like that is anti-science because it is not based on any studies. It's based on his own personal spiritual beliefs. The way to avoid AIDS based on science is not to shift your interpretation of reality or mode of consciousness or whatever. It's to use protection and not share needles with people. To promote anything else is extremely irresponsible, or to say it in a way that could be so easily interpreted in the way that I'm interpreting it right now, and I think pretty much anyone would interpret. If you go watch this video or listen to the audio recording of it, like, all my sources are linked down below, so feel free to check it out. I don't know how anyone else could interpret it differently. And so it's just, it could have severe negative impacts on anyone who just believes what he says. But apparently, though, that's not what he meant at all, because I think it was like years later, someone called him out for this interview, and he responded by acting like it was just wild that anyone could get the impression that he's an AIDS denier, that his views on AIDS were problematic at all. And so he responded in this thing on his website, which you can read, but like one of the things he says is, of course the HIV virus causes AIDS. And he's just kind of like really snarky and condescending towards this guy who rightfully called him out for something he said that was really, really dangerous information. He once said in his book Quantum Healing that research on spontaneous remission in cancer patients has shown that just about every patient has a dramatic shift in awareness right before the cancer goes away. He says that these patients jump to a new level of consciousness that prohibits the existence of cancer. Then the cancer cells either disappear literally overnight in some cases, or at the very least stabilize without damaging the body any further. And he believes that this is an example of quantum healing, you know, the mind healing the body or correcting the mistakes of the body. Robert L. Park, a professor of physics at the University of Maryland, has said that physicist wins at Chopra's use of quantum in the context of curing cancer. Now, after me saying all that, you'll probably be really surprised to hear that Deepak Chopra actually won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1998. He won the Ig Nobel Prize for Physics, which is a satirical prize awarded to unusual or trivial scientific achievements. Chopra won for his unique interpretation of quantum physics as it applies to life, liberty, and the pursuit of economic freedom. I recommend scrolling through the list of winners of this award on Wikipedia because some of them are really funny. Like, I got quite a few good laughs out of that page. Physics professor Chad Orzel has said, "To a physicist, Chopra's babble about energy fields and congealing quantum soup presents as utter gibberish, but he drops enough names and technical terms to sound superficially like somebody with real knowledge of physics, making it really hard for those of us who really know how the universe works to convince non-scientists that he doesn't. If both sides throw around technical terms, but one twists them into a compelling narrative, while the other is full of limits and caveats and, math, well, the fact that the people with the complicated story are right doesn't carry as much weight as it ought to." And something that quote made me kind of think of is that a lot of the physicists and other sciencey people that I've read articles about quantum mechanics and whatever from, they understand that their audience is not people who are educated in physics, and they take that into account when they're writing. They try to make it as comprehensible as possible. I mean, it's not going to be completely comprehensible because it's quantum science, but they try to make it as easy to understand as possible because they want people to understand what they're saying. Whereas on the other hand, I don't get the impression that Deepak Chopra cares if people understand what he's saying and how he's coming to these conclusions. As long as he sounds like he knows what he's talking about and people agree with his conclusions, I get the impression that that's all that matters, because I know I'm far from the only person who hears what he says, especially about quantum stuff, and it just doesn't make any sense because he doesn't explain it thoroughly, and he uses a lot of word salad. He throws in big words that make him sound educated and whatever. And I'm not saying he's not educated, but it's it just seems less about the content of what he's saying and more about just sounding smart. And that brings me to the question of whether or not he believes what he says and what he promotes. And before I started making this video, it's hard for me to accept that there are people who could make entire careers off of things that they know are lies and just complete made up BS. And so before I really knew anything about him, I mean, I kind of I leaned towards thinking, nah, he couldn't do that. But at the same time, it's when he is out here responding to a question about how someone's daily meditation can help heal the planet by saying, "Quantum physicists have shown that a unified field of intelligence gives rise to everything in the universe, including our body, the stars, the galaxies, subatomic particles, and all else." I really struggle to accept that he believes that, because it's so obviously not what any physicists are showing or saying. when he says,
if you believe in a rock, you're automatically believing in God.
I don't know how an educated person could say that and think that it's logical or convincing or meaningful in any way whatsoever. I'm sure most of the things he says he does believe in. Like, I mean, he has a lot of non-controversial opinions too, like meditation can be helpful with stress. I mean, no one's really going to argue that. But when it comes to, you know, the double slit experiment too, I would expect most people not to really do that much research on it once they hear about it in a mystical way. Just kind of take it for what it is. I'm not saying you should do that, but I can see how a lot of people would. But on the other hand, somebody like him, I would expect a lot more in-depth level of research and investigation, because he is attempting to make he is making an entire career out of trying to interpret quantum physics. And he knows that the majority of physicists, maybe all of them, I don't know, but at least the majority, the physics community in general, don't agree with him on his interpretations. He knows that. He's 100% aware of that. But he doesn't care, because he must think he knows better than all of them. He doesn't really show concern about the accuracy of his claims. Rather, it seems Chopra prioritizes maintaining and defending the conclusions he's already formed. In my opinion, he's either arrogant, ignorant, a fraud, or all three. So what's the problem with Deepak Chopra's teachings? Well, the most basic one is that they're not based on that much empirical evidence, which is evidence obtained through observation and experimentation. I'm certain some of his claims do have studies and experiments backing them up, but many of his claims about Ayurvedic healings, as well as his practices regarding them, like the pulse diagnosis, and then, you know, the quantum stuff, it's just flat out objectively wrong, or not supported by any science, or stupidly misinterpreted. And of the things that are backed up by a good amount of evidence, I honestly think it's just coincidence. Like, I don't get the impression that he bases his beliefs and practices off of how much evidence is out there. I think he just gets lucky sometimes, and some things just happen to have good evidence. I say this in a lot of videos because it's pretty frequently true, but a less extreme version of what Deepak promotes is scientifically shown to be beneficial for health, in the sense that, you know, meditation can help reduce stress, and stress does affect the body. Same thing with just things that have to do with your mindset. Like meditation can affect your mindset, your consciousness, or whatever, and your mindset can affect your stress levels, your outlook on life. So mindset can have a slight impact on your physical body that would be shown through science, but it's not like I promise, it's not like I've gone through every study on the planet related to health, but I think it's pretty obvious, and not that many people besides Deepak Chopra would argue that there are no studies showing that it's possible to have perfect health as long as you just get to a certain level of consciousness. That's why he's taking it to the extreme. If he just kept it more mundane, would he have as many followers on Twitter? No. Would as many people buy his books? No. Would he have as much money? No. But at least he would have his integrity. But anyways, it's like Ayurveda promotes exercise. Obviously, exercise is good for us. I personally didn't do much research into the dietary suggestions of Ayurveda, but I'm gonna guess some of them are promoted by science and some of them aren't. So it's not all bad. But it's like the saying, a broken clock is right twice a day. Just because Ayurveda might get some things right and help some people, or a lot of people, it is still pseudoscience. It's still not based on empirical evidence. It's based on really, really old texts, and their age doesn't mean they're wrong, but it doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't really increase their accuracy in the sense that modern, recent medical studies published in reputable journals would. Chopra appeals to people who are captivated by ancient wisdom, Eastern philosophy, holistic alternative natural methods of healing and living. But not only does old age not make something more accurate, but something being natural or holistic doesn't make it better or worse. In fact, many Ayurvedic herbs and supplements have been shown to be dangerous because of the amount of heavy metals that they often contain. According to a study from 2017 published in the International Journal of Occupational and Environmental Health, it is estimated that over 20% of the Ayurvedic medications manufactured and distributed by US and Indian companies contain toxic metals such as lead, mercury, and/or arsenic. The study also reports that in their sampling, a percentage of each of these metals were found in amounts that exceeded the recommended daily intake, and it was like almost 50% for mercury, for example. There are many other studies on this, and you'll get slightly different numbers, of course, but it's clear that a high amount of Ayurvedic products contain unhealthy levels of heavy metals, and from my research, this is because it's like an Ayurvedic belief that these metals are actually beneficial for you. Deepak promotes Ayurveda as something that can treat cancer, though Cancer Research UK states that there's no evidence for this, just that aspects of Ayurveda such as massage, yoga, and meditation can help relieve cancer symptoms, mainly because they help you relax and reduce stress. He makes claims about physics that virtually no physicist would agree with. He claims it's possible to achieve perfect health. As I've said, I'd love to see the evidence for that other than his little anecdote about him never even having a cough or nothing. Because it's just, that's not convincing, that's not evidence, that's not science. I think the worst impact that Chopra probably has is on those who have very serious health problems, who have tried so many different things, are in a very desperate place, willing to just try anything that could help them because they've tried so many things and nothing's working. They want to live, they want to be healthy, they want to feel good. That leads to desperation, and that leads to believing people who are really just spewing nonsense, unfortunately. And I don't mean that against anyone who's ever believed something that Chopra said or anything. I'm sure I would feel the same way if I had some really bad health problem. But the problem with that is people might substitute treatment that is backed with a lot of empirical evidence with Chopra's idea of treatment. Sure, it might help some. I'm not denying that Deepak Chopra has helped people. Of course he has. But it's also guaranteed to harm some people because it is pseudoscience. I don't think Chopra is some evil guy who just wants to make money off people and doesn't care if someone dies from his treatment. But I also don't think he's a good person who isn't mainly financially motivated, and who I don't think he cares deeply about the evidence for his claims. I think he's money hungry, power hungry, and fame hungry, but the fact that he is inspiring some people and is helping some people makes him feel justified in all those things. He's a total boss babe though. I wish I had the work ethic he did. But that's all I have for you with this video. I hope it was okay. My confidence kind of went down as I started working on the Ayurveda and quantum physics part. I hope it was coherent and whatnot, and didn't seem too rushed, or I don't know. But I plan to make similar types of videos like this for Medical Medium, Anthony Williams, and Joe Dispenza, and also maybe David Icke, maybe. We shall see. But thank you for watching, and as always, let me know your thoughts down below.